Sutra Action Law Taboo. There are things we simply shouldn't think about. Our imagination can make us happy in times of difficulty and miserable even in the best of times. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This popular prayer in Anglo-Saxon countries, it hung above the desk of U.S. President John F. Kennedy and has been used by Alcoholics Anonymous since 1940, reflects a very important necessity for a person to bring order to their own thoughts and emotions. Every day, countless ideas come to us, telling us what to say, what to do, where to go. It is crucial to be careful and attentive to which thoughts take hold of us. It's best to immediately banish negative ones, as they not only steal our time that could be spent more constructively but also our health. People inevitably face both pleasant and negative things every day, and the modern world offers endless reasons for negative thoughts and emotions: a failed project, a mistake made, a work crisis, or just everyday difficulties. The problem is that most people are not equipped to effectively deal with them. What happens when someone starts dwelling on painful topics? Lisa Firestone, a British psychologist, notes that according to one study, the main cause of psychological disorders in 30,000 participants was the constant rumination on negative events and self-reproach. Simplifying it somewhat, we could say, sometimes it's not the negative events themselves that affect a person's mental state, but their thoughts about them. The stream of negative thoughts about oneself is what some psychologists call the inner critic's voice. This is the eternal inner dialogue, accompanied by constant self-blame and the repeated reliving of unpleasant situations. The time spent in such a dark conversation with oneself is irretrievably lost. Negative thoughts won't elevate us to a new level. At best, we'll go in circles, and at worst, the problem will only worsen. This voice can be dangerous, as it whispers distrust of loved ones, failures, and sometimes advises terrible things. Negative thoughts should not be allowed to take root in our consciousness. As soon as we identify the inner critic, it's wise to dissociate from it and say to ourselves, "This isn't me, it's him." Experts also suggest switching to positive thoughts in such cases, which, of course, is not always easy, but it is possible. For example, "I'm a total failure, and I'll never succeed," says our inner critic. You can respond, "Okay. This time I made a mistake. So what? It happens. Next time I'll do better because I have experience." This way, we block the critic, but not ourselves. We don't stay stuck in our negative past but take a step forward and think about the future. Research has shown that gratitude can stand in the way of unnecessary and harmful streams of thoughts. And if we're going through a rough patch, it's worth finding something good for which we can thank our loved ones, friends, or the universe. This means that not everything is so bad in our lives, and there are bright moments that we need to remember. The sleep of reason produces monsters. Francisco Goya, Caprichos. Now is not the time to think about what you don't have. Think about what you can do with what you have. Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. Sometimes negative thoughts become persistent, like uninvited guests. But a true host will find the right words to say goodbye to them in time. Everyone occasionally experiences a bad mood, vague longing, sadness, melancholy, or fear. But a living soul has living words that disperse the darkness. Mikhail Lermontov beautifully wrote about this in his poem Prayer. In a moment of life's hardships, when sorrow presses in the heart, I recite one wondrous prayer by heart, time and again. There is a blessed power in the harmony of living words, and an inexplicable, holy charm breathes in them. The burden falls from the soul, doubts are far away and one believes, and one weeps, and it is so easy, so easy. The worst enemies of a person wouldn't wish upon him the misfortunes his own thoughts can bring, says Eastern wisdom. One of the main virtues of a free person is to be the master of the home of their soul, to control their thoughts, feelings, and words, to live by their own mind. After all, a person is not only the subject of knowledge but also its object. I am both the gardener and the flower, as Ossip Mandelstam expressed it. People who can control the flow of thoughts entering their minds attain inner freedom. There are different moments in life, both positive and negative. Very often, fearing failure, we start thinking about possible troubles in advance. For example, fearing an exam, we vividly imagine our possible failure. In this case, on the informational level, we become a generator of negative waves, which spread into the matter of astral and mental bodies. These waves significantly affect both us and our actions. Jealous people always look through a telescope that makes small things appear big, dwarfs into giants, and guesses into truth. Cervantes. In physics, there is the concept of self-oscillation and autowaves, a self-sustaining wave process in a non-equilibrium medium. They are the basis of most processes of control and information transfer in biological systems. Waves of negativity, which originate from our thoughts, affect us, worsen our mood and physical well-being. In such a state, we inevitably start recalling our past negative experiences or fears, leading to the creation of new waves, and the process, which is hard to stop, begins. Therefore, it is highly desirable to establish a taboo on thoughts that bring no benefit but only poison our lives. The term taboo, a strict, sacred prohibition on performing a specific action, was borrowed by anthropologists from the religious ritual practices of Polynesia and is used in modern science to refer to a system of specific prohibitions, features of which, under various names, are found among all peoples at a certain stage of development. The cultural roots of the concept of taboo were explored by the famous founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. For him, taboo in human history is primarily associated with the prohibition of incest, i.e., close familial sexual relations. From a non-Freudian, for example, functional point of view, this was supposed to prevent both the degeneration of the tribe and the emergence of internal conflicts within the tribe due to women they had to be acquired, i.e., usually abducted or conquered from other tribes. However, for Freud, another aspect was more important. Taboo is not just a prohibition, but a prohibition that is not explained, it is forbidden, and that's it. In the primitive world, speech was still very underdeveloped, not to mention the complete absence of science. However, there was a vast amount of life experience that was concentrated in myths. It was precisely in cosmogonic myths, i.e., myths about the creation of the world and the origin of humanity, Freud noted, that taboos were generally introduced. We know the fear of what we do not know. Twilight brings unclear dread. W. H. Auden. Jealousy is the sister of stupidity. If a husband begins to be jealous, trouble is inevitable. Modern people might need to establish a similarly strict taboo on unnecessary thoughts. Fortunately, Homo sapiens is a highly developed biological organism equipped with self-regulation mechanisms. We can create our reality by modeling our worldview through self-suggestion. We are fortunate to be able to see in two different ways. We can look at an object with our eyes. The image will be reflected on the retina through the lens of the eye and reach the visual cortex via the optic nerve. Or we can not look at anything, even close our eyes, just use our imagination, and the internal image will reach the same part of the brain. This is how, for instance, we see dreams. Neurophysiologists have even learned to record signals from the visual cortex and model the images we imagine on a computer screen. For a person with an imagination, they are just as real as those seen with their eyes and can regularly induce a state called a trance. A trance is possible due to our tendency for selective attention when what our eyes see, as well as what our ears hear and hands feel, is suppressed by our own narrative, which is much more engaging at the moment. For example, we read a book where the hero is experiencing a love drama. We no longer see the text but our own internal movie about unfortunate love. Subjective perception of reality is stronger than the objective. This internal picture overrides the signals from the outside world, and we are, in effect, hypnotized. In general, people are in a state of trance all the time, jumping from one to another. Some do this because of their profession, like a conductor who hears each of the 110 musicians at a rehearsal separately. Selective attention, the selective analysis of signals, is an amazing ability of the brain, and it would be a shame not to use it to improve the quality of life. Jealousy is a monster that gives birth to itself and then feeds on itself. William Shakespeare. Overcome difficulties with intelligence and dangers with experience. Although humans are capable of multitasking and can visually and auditorily control two processes at once, their maximum attention will always be where their consciousness is actively engaged at the moment. We can think of one thing while doing another, but when we focus on what we are doing, the results are better, if only because it allows us to be creative. A person is always in a specific complex of sensations and experiences that do not fully correspond to the real world. They do not fully feel, see, or hear what is actually happening around them. Because of this, each person's experience is completely unique. Even twins watching the same show will perceive it differently. One might be distracted by one thing, the other by something else. This difference in perception will eventually help them develop into two unique individuals. As the Americans say, perception is reality. Only those events we notice are real to us. The great psychologist and physiologist Dmitry Uznets developed the theory of attitudes, which he understood as a person's readiness to perceive, evaluate, and act in a certain way toward phenomena and objects of reality. In other words, people usually have an internal readiness for a specific perception of reality that influences their behavior. Simply put, a person with a positive mindset will always see the glass as half full. And serotonin plays a huge role in forming this predisposition, a fantastic neurotransmitter that affects memory, emotions, sleep, bears hibernation, beautiful dreams, meditation, a predisposition to yoga, self-perception, calmness, and harmony. And tolerance, the most important quality in today's world. A person who sees the glass as half empty has very little serotonin. The same goes for a criminal at the moment of a non-cold-blooded murder. This substance is produced by the body from the essential amino acid tryptophan, which is mainly found in proteins like caviar, rabbit meat, and beef. Thus, in a sense, perceiving the world in a positive light is a matter of chemistry. A man is made miserable or happy only by his thoughts, not by external circumstances. By controlling his thoughts, he controls his happiness. Friedrich Nietzsche. Fear should not give advice. We live in a world we construct for ourselves. We can set a goal to limit everything that threatens to destroy the harmony of our existence. In epistemology, there is a concept called Occam's razor, a methodological scientific principle named after the English Franciscan monk and nominalist philosopher William of Ockham. In brief, it states, do not multiply entities without necessity. Occam himself wrote, what can be done with fewer assumptions should not be done with more, and plurality should not be posited without necessity. Sometimes it is also called the principle of parsimony or the law of economy. In other words, if we have a simpler, more economical explanation for a scientific, or any other, mystery, we should choose it, cutting off the other theories with Occam's razor. Something like Occam's razor should be applied, I think, to some of the thoughts in our heads. There are things we simply should not think about. For example, a healthy person does not think about death, because if you constantly think about dying, it is unclear if you are truly living. Overgrown jealousy is one of those topics that should be off limits. Lope de Vega wrote, *, believe me, love leaves by the same path that jealousy enters. *. This is a very wise thought. A mindset focused on a particular way of seeing life is the greatest opportunity for happiness that our brain gives us. We must give our loved ones the right to personal space. We zip up our bags, put money in the inner pocket of our jackets, and buy cabinets and curtains to keep things from revealing unnecessary information. Not because it's bad, but because it's unnecessary and therefore potentially harmful. You will not die before your time. A man fears only what he does not know, knowledge conquers all fear. Vissarion Belinsky. The one who is always gloomy, jealous, and morose often has a poor start in love. Molière. Do you remember the story about the two monks on their way to Santiago de Compostela? A young woman stands by the river, afraid of the water. The first monk carries her across. They continue on their way. The second monk begins to scold, "I saw you touch her chest, she was breathing into your ear, you couldn't help but lust after her. Shame on you, we are on a holy pilgrimage." The first monk replies, "I left that woman back there, but you are still carrying her with you." Negative fantasies can ruin even the happiest life. Therefore, we should simply give ourselves a rule: don't think about death, don't think about bad things, don't compare yourself to others. We should think about ourselves, paint our world with bright colors, without creating problems for others or peeking behind their curtains. Yes, such a mindset is also a trance. Since we are destined to move from one trance state to another, we should only agree to the most comfortable ones. In most cases, a person can choose how to live in joy or sadness. Let's remember Bach's famous endings. He always finished religious music in a minor key with a major triad so that people would leave the church with faith and without anxiety. In horror films, on the other hand, they like to end with an ellipsis hinting that the monster has not been completely destroyed and there will be a sequel to the nightmare. The monster itself, by the way, is not that scary when you see it. Your brain focuses on how to survive, climb a tree or jump into the water. The anticipation of horror is much worse, the thoughts about it, even from the perspective of an observer. And if the camera is placed inside the victim, it's even scarier. But the most terrifying thing is when the camera is inside the monster's head. The viewer feels the anxiety, understands that the danger comes from within, and doesn't even know who they are. The conclusion is, a person who knows who they are, who spends a lot of energy building their rich inner world, lives without fear. No director can invent a monster with enough heads, arms, legs, tongues, and teeth to scare them. Jealousy, like rust, destroys the heart. Fear tends to exaggerate the true significance of a fact. Victor Hugo. In religion, the inadmissibility of certain types of thoughts has always been closely linked to the issue of sin. In highly developed religions, sinfulness can be attributed not only to people's actions, deeds they have already committed, but also to the thoughts, or fantasies, about the possibility of such deeds. Such thought crimes, to use somewhat loosely a term from George Orwell's dystopia 1984, are mentioned in the Bible. The 10 Commandments from the Old Testament, given to Moses, were a set of norms designed to curb natural human instincts and weaknesses, for example, the limitation of the common law of blood vengeance among southern peoples, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In the New Testament, Christ sets a new standard, a new level for his followers. You have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew 5:27-28. In other words, the 10 Commandments for Christians are the natural minimum, not even up for debate. However, if you embark on a path of serious spiritual endeavor, the struggle will be not so much external as internal, on the level of thoughts. For there are several stages between the birth of a thought and the embodiment of sin in action. Christian theologians identify several stages in the development of sin from thought to action. First there is suggestion, then attention, followed by pleasure, then desire, from it determination, and finally the sinful deed itself. Suggestion, Greek, prospoli, is the inception of a thought, the embedding of an idea into our consciousness, the first degree of sin's penetration into the soul. The person subject to suggestion is not yet considered guilty. Everyone, except those who have reached the highest degree of dispassion, is subject to suggestions. Temptation itself does not yet constitute sin. One can be tempted without sinning. Suggestion acts on the soul externally. Christian ascetics often compared this action to the wind, which is dangerous only for those not protected by clothing. Without attaining dispassion, one cannot avoid suggestions, but it is within a person's will not to accept the thought of the suggestion. The watchfulness of the soul gradually teaches the ascetic not to react to the occurring suggestions. Wrong thoughts lead to unhealthy advice. Your thoughts become your life. Marcus Aurelius. Thus, the arrival, or intrusion, of a thought is neither surprising nor sinful. When the devil suggests a thought to the soul, if no pleasure follows, then no sin is committed. By pleasure here, we mean precisely the sharpening of attention on the intrusive thought, the agreement to dwell on it, to let it into one's inner space. And the further course of action is well known. This is the taboo Christ spoke of in the Gospels, and it is this that the entire subsequent experience of ascetic self-observation of one's mind and soul by Christian ascetics speaks to. The second stage in the development of sin is attention. Attention is the fixation of consciousness or the eye of the mind exclusively on the newly born thought, sinful image, in order to examine it, as if to converse with it. This dwelling on a simple or complex thought is a critical moment in moral life. It stands on the threshold of action. Whoever cuts off the thought at the start, without focusing attention on it, extinguishes the whole battle, cuts off sin in its infancy. Conversely, whoever allows the suggestion to take root within, who dwells on it with attention, examines it, takes pleasure in it, reveals a sinful disposition of the heart. Here, a person is already reborn to sin, and here it is even more necessary to enter into battle and overcome the temptation. But the struggle here is more difficult, harder than at the first stage, with suggestions. This stage of sin was called by medieval theologians lingering desire, lingering precisely on the contemplation of the forbidden fruit. Muslims believe that thoughts that do not increase a person's faith, that hinder them from progressing on the path prepared by Allah, clutter the mind and impede the achievement of the goal Allah's approval. Such thoughts come to a person at the instigation of Shaitan, and from such thoughts, faith should be cleansed. Avoid much suspicion, indeed some suspicion is sin. The Quran clearly sets priorities, Quran 49:12. It may seem that a thought is just a thought, what can it change? However, reality is more complex. Negative thoughts, if not combated, gradually fill our perception, pushing out the good and the bright. To avoid shame before Allah on the Day of Judgment, Muslim theologians recommend that believers hold on to good and bright thoughts, paving their way to the gardens of paradise. Jealousy deals a fatal blow to the most solid and strongest love. Ovid. Those who do not fear danger are avoided by it. There is no remedy against death. In religions, taboos often serve as universal rules that are beneficial to believers not only from a spiritual but also from a practical point of view. For example, kashrut in Judaism, a set of laws by which Jews must prepare their food. One of the taboos in Judaism is the ritual prohibition of consuming meat and dairy together. This is explained not only by physiology. Cooking meat in milk increases the dish's fat content and shortens its shelf life, which in hot countries is a direct path to potential poisoning. Jewish theologians associate this prohibition with the biblical commandment, "Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk," Exodus 34:26, Deuteronomy 14:21, attributing to it moral significance. The expression and its context suggest that it may be about something else. This law expresses the general principle of respect for the relationship between a mother and her child, a deliberate reminder of humane behavior. Also, this law forbids mixing life and death at the same time. A mother's milk, which sustains the life of her young, cannot be associated with its death. On the one hand, kashrut, these hygienic rules developed over centuries, are maximally adapted to the physiological characteristics of the Jewish people. On the other hand, the strict observance of such dietary taboos is an expression of an important humanistic commandment, which through the metaphor "do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk" postulates the value of parent-child relationships. Be mindful of your thoughts, they are the beginning of actions. Lao Tzu. Man is the product of his own thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. Mahatma Gandhi. There is no looking at the sun, nor death, with a steady eye. Great importance was placed on cleansing the mind of unnecessary thoughts in the religions of the great civilizations of the Far East and South Asia. Be mindful of your thoughts, they are the beginning of actions, said Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism and an outstanding ancient Chinese philosopher. Remember, happiness does not depend on who you are or what you have. It depends solely on what you think. These words are attributed to Buddha. And thousands of years later, another great Indian, Mahatma Gandhi, formulated the same idea: man is the product of his own thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. It's hard to disagree with that.